I loved Sylvia for a full 10 years. Later, her family went bankrupt, and her father came begging me to marry her. After we got married, I was completely sincere toward her. I helped her family repay their debts, rebuilt her company, and elevated her into a formidable businesswoman. But what did she do? She accused me of forcing her to marry me and even claimed I was abusive. In the end, she pushed me off the rooftop, and I died a miserable death. Yet she seized my $100 billion fortune and ran off with her first love. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day her father came begging for the marriage alliance. Sylvia held a fruit knife to her own neck, her eyes filled with disgust, and said to me, "Ethan, I'd rather die than marry you." Sylvia's father quickly snatched the fruit knife from her hand and slapped her across the face, scolding, "Shut up. You'll marry whether you want to or not." Sylvia covered her cheek, her eyes reddening with both grievance and resentment. Sylvia's father immediately turned to me, bowing and scraping. "Ethan, Sylvia is being childish. Please don't be angry." Seeing this scene, I finally realized, I had been reborn. In my previous life, Sylvia, persuaded by her father, eventually agreed to marry me. I married her as I wished, then helped her family pay off tens of millions in debt, and even founded a company specifically for her. I used all my resources and connections to build her into a successful businesswoman. In daily life, I also took meticulous care of her, striving to be a good husband. I thought my sincerity would touch her, but I never expected that not only did she not love me, she even hated me, believing that I had ruined her life. She falsely accused me of domestic violence and claimed that I forced her to marry me back then, causing me to be condemned by everyone and the company's stock price to plummet. While I was in the midst of the storm, I discovered that she had secretly transferred all my assets into her name. I became penniless and fell ill in a fit of anger. She seized the opportunity to take me to the rooftop and said fiercely, "Ethan, if it weren't for you, I would have married Finn long ago. Do you know how disgusted I've felt every single day I've been with you?" Ignoring my pleas, she personally pushed me over the edge, creating the false appearance that I had committed suicide out of shame. I became a wandering ghost, forced to watch helplessly as she seized my $100 billion fortune, completely powerless to stop her. That kind of pain truly cuts to the bone. I said coldly, "Since she doesn't want to marry me, I won't force her." Sylvia looked at me in shock, probably surprised that I would say such a thing. After all, I had loved her for 10 years, and no matter how many times she rejected me, I had never given up. Upon hearing this, Sylvia's father said in a panic, "Ethan, don't get the wrong idea. Sylvia is willing to marry you." Before I could even speak, Sylvia's younger brother, Wade, sneered disdainfully and said, "Dad, don't worry. Ethan has been chasing my sister for 10 years, sticking to her like a stubborn plaster that can't be shaken off. He's probably just playing hard to get now." In my past life, I truly treated Wade like my own brother, often sending him money and gifting him luxury cars. Even the exorbitant bride price for his wedding was paid by me. Yet, after Sylvia pushed me off the rooftop, he said I deserved it. These siblings are nothing but ungrateful wolves who can't be tamed. At this thought, my gaze instantly turned cold. Watch your mouth. You're in no position to act so arrogant in front of me. Wade didn't take it seriously at all and even scoffed with a dismissive humph. Stop pretending. Be careful, or I won't speak well of you in front of my sister anymore. Hearing Wade's words, Sylvia put on that haughty, smug expression again and said, "Ethan, I can agree to marry you, but don't even think I'll ever fall in love with you." I was genuinely grateful to the heavens for giving me this chance at rebirth. In this life, I would never get entangled with her again. No need. There's no way I'm marrying you. Your family's debt issues are your own problem to solve. It has nothing to do with me. Sylvia froze for a few seconds, then said furiously, "Fine, Ethan. You'd better keep your word and don't come begging me to accept your help later. My family can get through this crisis just fine without you." Her arrogant demeanor reminded me of her family's bankruptcy in my previous life, when I was running myself ragged for her, yet she took my help for granted and stubbornly insisted, "Don't think that just because you helped my family pay off the debts, you can control me." I spent both money and effort, and even had to humble myself to explain that I was doing it willingly. I was truly foolish to the core. With a cold expression, I said, "Since you're so capable, get out of my office right now." Sylvia's face flushed red as she said, "Ethan, you'll regret this." Regret? The only thing I regret is being used like a fool by her in my previous life. Now that I've come to my senses, her days of comfort are over. I didn't bother with her anymore and kicked her entire family out. Then I instructed my assistant, terminate all funding plans for Sylvia's family. From now on, Sylvia's affairs have nothing to do with me. Also, notify the bank to deactivate the supplementary card I gave her. That same night, I received a call from Sylvia. She immediately confronted me. "Ethan, did you have something to do with Walter refusing to cooperate with me?" I sneered coldly. "Sylvia, are you out of your mind? Last time, Walter only agreed to work with you because of my influence. Now that he knows I won't be involved with your matters anymore, it's only natural he's unwilling to cooperate, isn't it?" Sylvia couldn't believe I would treat her this way, especially since I had always been at her beck and call before. She screamed in anger, "Ethan, don't think that just because my family is bankrupt, you can use your power to pressure me. Even without you, I can still secure the partnership on my own." Sylvia is too full of herself, she has no real ability. Most of the clients from her father's group were ones I had already approached beforehand. I just didn't tell her to avoid hurting her pride. But in her eyes, I'm nothing but a despicable villain. On the other end of the phone, Sylvia was still accusing me, and why can't I use my card anymore? In my previous life, Sylvia always pretended to reject me, but she never refused any of the expensive gifts I gave her or the supplementary card. She really wanted to have her cake and eat it too. "I've frozen your card." Sylvia immediately flew into a rage. "Why didn't you tell me you were freezing the card? Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was for me to be unable to pay at the mall just now?" I sneered coldly, "It's my card, and I can freeze it whenever I want. I don't need to tell you." Sylvia fell silent for a moment, then smiled sarcastically. "Ethan, do you think I would bow down to you for money? Impossible. Freeze the card if you want, I don't need your money." After saying that, she hung up the phone. I wasn't angry either and promptly blocked her. Without my help, this bankrupt heiress quickly became a plaything for many powerful figures. I wanted her to taste the feeling of living a life worse than death. In the evening, I invited a few friends out for drinks. In the past, I had been completely focused on Sylvia, and my relationships with friends had grown distant. Now, I won't be that foolish anymore. While drinking, I saw Sylvia walk in. She headed straight for the booth, where a man was sitting, her white moonlight, Finn. Sylvia always thought her father disapproved of her relationship with Finn because of me. In reality, I never got involved, because her father had always looked down on Finn for his humble origins. It wasn't until after I died that I found out Sylvia had cheated on me with Finn not long after we got married, and she even used my money to support him, while I was kept completely in the dark. She also said she didn't want to have children and wanted to be a dink, so she asked me to get a vasectomy. I loved her so much that I agreed. But just a few days after I died, she got pregnant with Finn's child. It's utterly ridiculous. Seeing me staring at Sylvia, my friends thought I was upset and tried to comfort me. I shook my head and said, "You've got it wrong. A heartless woman like Sylvia isn't worth my sadness." My friends were all stunned. They exchanged glances and then said excitedly, "That's great, Ethan. We've been wanting to talk to you about this for a long time. There are plenty of good women out there." I smiled without saying a word. Halfway through the drink, I went to the restroom and unexpectedly ran into Sylvia and Finn. As soon as Sylvia saw me, her face flushed with anger. "Ethan, you're stalking me again, have you no shame?" In the past, I worried that something might happen to her as a girl coming to the bar alone, so I followed her, but she doesn't know that now. The sight of her face disgusts me. Finn glanced at me and sneered, "Sylvia, it seems he still loves you and wants to marry you." I gave him a cold glance. "Who do you think you are? You have no right to speak here." Sylvia was instantly provoked. "Ethan, what gives you the right to criticize Finn? A businessman like you, reeking of money, can't compare to his purity. I won't marry you, so give up on that idea." After saying that, she took Finn and left. I watched her retreating figure, a flicker of coldness flashing in my eyes. I wouldn't let her off so easily. Since Sylvia's family declared bankruptcy, they quickly fell into decline. Sylvia searched everywhere for a way out, but each time she hit a wall. Standing from a high vantage point, I watched her pitiful state and thought to myself, this was only the beginning. In the evening, I had arranged to have dinner with a client. When I arrived at the private room, I found Sylvia inside instead. She lifted her chin and said stubbornly, "Ethan, I admit defeat. I agree to marry you." I understood immediately, she was at her wit's end and had turned to me as a last resort. I sneered and refused, "I have no interest in marrying you. A heartless woman like you doesn't deserve to be my wife." Sylvia didn't believe me and said impatiently, "Enough, Ethan. Stop playing games. Everything you've done recently was just to force me to give in, wasn't it? I've already agreed to marry you. What more do you want?" I looked at her as if she were an idiot. "Can't you understand plain English? I said I don't want to marry you." Sylvia's face turned pale, and she took a deep breath before saying, "Then give me 80 million. I mocked her, "Didn't you say you could handle the debt yourself? What's the deal with asking me for money now?" Sylvia gritted her teeth and said, "Enough with the nonsense. If it weren't for you meddling, I wouldn't have ended up in this situation. Those 80 million are what you owe me." Ha, she really thinks I'm a fool. "Forget 80 million, I won't give you a single cent." I didn't want to stay with her any longer. Just as I was about to leave, I realized the door was locked. When I turned around, I saw Sylvia tearing her own stockings and dress, pretending to have been assaulted. "Ethan, give me 80 million, or I'll accuse you of rape and ruin your reputation." She had long grown accustomed to using me as a stepping stone. Now that I refuse to be taken advantage of anymore, she thinks it's my fault. How ridiculous. I said expressionlessly, "Sylvia, I'd rather throw my money to a beggar than give it to you." "You." Sylvia's angry expression froze, then she suddenly gave a strange smile. Before I could react, the private room door was kicked open. Finn barged in with a group of reporters. Sylvia covered her torn dress and cried, "Ethan proposed to me, and when I refused, he forced himself on me." Finn cursed, "Ethan, how dare you use such despicable means against Sylvia? You're truly shameless." I thought that after being reborn, I wouldn't be slandered by her again, but it seems I still can't escape it. That despicable couple. Countless cameras were aimed at me. "Ethan, is it true that you assaulted Sylvia because you couldn't have her? Do you know how this will negatively impact your company's image?" The reporters' microphones were practically shoved in my face, their questions growing sharper and sharper, as if trying to nail me to a pillar of shame. They were even live-streaming, with the comments section flooded with insults directed at me. I had been set up, but I had a backup plan. After a moment, I spoke up to clarify, "I did not assault Sylvia. All of this was orchestrated by her." Finn pointed at me and said, "You're lying. Sylvia would never do such a thing." Ignoring him, I continued, "I also never proposed to Sylvia. She wanted to marry me, and after I refused, she demanded 80 million from me." Sylvia said tearfully, "Ethan, I never expected you to be this kind of person. If you didn't assault me, then did I ruin my own reputation just to frame you? Besides, I don't even love you, how could I possibly want to marry you?" Finn snorted coldly, "What 8 million? Sylvia has never cared about money. Ever since her family went bankrupt, she's been trying hard to save it. If she really loved money, she would have agreed to your proposal long ago." A reporter nodded and said, "Exactly, Ethan. You've been pursuing Sylvia for 10 years. Everyone knows you love her and definitely want to have her. I understand Sylvia's intention in doing this. Once she successfully slanders me, I'll be accused of assaulting her, and the company will also be affected. Either I marry her or give her 80 million to settle this storm. No matter which I choose, it benefits her." The barrage was still cursing me, shameless scumbag, taking advantage of Sylvia's family bankruptcy to force yourself on her. Why doesn't he just die? He thinks he can do whatever he wants just because he has a few stinking dollars. Let his company go bankrupt and stop harming people. Sylvia looked at me smugly, as if to say, serves you right for not listening to me. I was all too familiar with such scenes. She had slandered me in the same way in my previous life. This time, I remained calm and not the least bit flustered. At that moment, my assistant walked in and handed me my phone. I opened it and played a video. Sylvia had no idea that I had asked my assistant to secretly record it outside. Everything she did was recorded, and her disgraceful demand for $80 million from me left the journalists present stunned. After all, Sylvia is famously known as the cold and arrogant heiress who never bows to anyone, yet she handled such matters with surprising proficiency. To give netizens a clearer view, I had my assistant post the video online. Public opinion quickly reversed. Damn, who would have thought she could be so vicious, accusing Ethan of assaulting her just for money. She even wanted Ethan to marry her. Who would marry such a scheming woman? Thankfully, Ethan came to his senses. Sylvia never expected I had this move up my sleeve. Her face turned pale, then flushed with anger, and she glared at me with bitter resentment. Having failed to slander me, she started slinging mud at me again. She cried, "You don't know, if I hadn't been forced into a corner, I wouldn't have done this. After my family went bankrupt, I reached out to everyone for help, but Ethan kept causing trouble. To force me to marry him, he made a client who had agreed to work with me back out. That client was Walter. If you don't believe me, you can ask him." I sneered and immediately dialed Walter's number. "Walter, it's me. Sylvia said I persuaded you to refuse to cooperate with her. I'd like to ask about the specifics." On the other end of the line, Walter scoffed at the mention of Sylvia. "To be honest, Ethan, if it weren't for you, Sylvia's family would have gone bankrupt long ago. Sylvia has absolutely no workability, she can't even get the contract terms right. She's just a pretty face. Last time I signed with her, it was only out of respect for you. Once this contract expires, I'm refusing to renew." After hanging up the phone, I said to the reporter's camera, "In the past, I helped Sylvia so much out of pity, but I'm not a charity, I'm a businessman. It's perfectly normal to stop helping her. Just because I didn't keep giving her money, does that mean I should be slandered by her?" One by one, Sylvia's lies were exposed, but instead of feeling guilty, she put on an act of being wronged, as if I had bullied her. "You're twisting the truth and taking advantage of me now that I'm down." Finn angrily confronted me. "Ethan, what kind of man bullies a weak woman? Sylvia had no choice but to borrow money from you. $8 million is just a drop in the bucket for you, why wouldn't you give it to her?" I gave him a cold glance. "You make it sound so easy. Why don't you help her pay off the debt?" Finn was left speechless by my question. Sylvia gritted her teeth and glared at me. "Ethan, if you have a problem, take it out on me. Don't target Finn, he's innocent." I sneered. Even now, she was still protecting her beloved. But I remembered that in my past life, Finn wasn't truly sincere toward her. He just wanted to marry into wealth and use Sylvia to climb the social ladder. Finn said, "Sylvia, the reason he's targeting me is because he likes you and thinks I'll take you away." Sylvia believed him and looked at me as if she had resigned herself to fate. "Ethan, I'm really done for now. There's no other choice but to marry you. Are you satisfied?" She still thought I wanted to marry her. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Sylvia, if you're sick, go get treated. Stop daydreaming all day about me wanting to marry you. You're not some fairy. Do you know that the moment I see you now, I feel like throwing up? It's disgusting." Sylvia's face turned pale. The reporters around her also began to murmur. It's obvious that Ethan doesn't like Sylvia at all. That's right, it's Sylvia who's been clinging to Ethan unilaterally. Even the netizens in the live stream could see it. Is this Sylvia crazy? Ethan doesn't care about her at all. The rumors were wrong. From start to finish, it was Sylvia who pushed for the marriage, not Ethan. Sylvia couldn't keep her composure after hearing the reporter's words and angrily shouted at me, "Ethan, aren't you afraid of messing things up if you keep acting? Stop pretending, or I'll ignore you." I couldn't be bothered to argue with her and said to the reporter, "If you dare to spread rumors about tonight's incident, I will hold you fully accountable." With that, I left. When I got home, my mother mysteriously pulled me aside to sit down. "Son, I need to discuss something with you. My friend's daughter has returned from abroad. She's beautiful and has a great personality. I'd like to arrange a blind date for you two." In my past life, I was devoted only to Sylvia and strongly resisted any matchmaking arranged by my family, never agreeing to blind dates. Later, Sylvia married me, but she showed no respect for my mother. She often argued with her, causing her to develop heart disease from anger. After learning of my death, she was overcome with grief and passed away directly. And my father, when he found out that Sylvia was responsible for my death, he tried to seek revenge. But she drowned him alive and staged it to look like an accidental fall into the water. Thinking about all this fills me with deep pain. I owe my parents far too much. Mom, just arrange it. I'll make time for the blind date. My mom was especially surprised and delighted to hear me say this, since I had always refused before. That's great. I'll call right away to set up a time. My mom couldn't wait for me to get married, so she quickly made the arrangements. The next evening, I arrived at the agreed-upon restaurant on time and saw a girl with delicate features sitting at the table. It must be Sharon, the daughter of my mom's friend, who I heard had been studying abroad all along. I used to make dinner plans with Sylvia, and she was always late, so I had a good impression of Sharon, who arrived early. I walked over and said, "Hello, I'm Ethan." Sharon stood up, tilted her head, and smiled at me. "Have you forgotten? We met when we were kids. I still remember you liked to draw." I was taken aback for a moment before recalling that it was indeed true. "Sorry, I didn't remember right away." Talking about childhood memories, we chatted happily without any of the awkwardness typical of a blind date. Suddenly, I turned my head and saw Sylvia and Wade. Sylvia also noticed me and frowned, asking, "Ethan, who is this woman?" Before I could speak, Wade sneered, "He must have brought her here to piss you off and make you jealous." Wade rolled his eyes at me, "Ethan, don't you think this trick is too cliché? Last time you embarrassed my sister in public, if you don't sincerely beg for her forgiveness, nothing you do will work." Sylvia snorted coldly, "I will never forgive him unless he kneels down and apologizes to me." Wade's eyes darted around, "Sis, I think 80 million isn't enough. He should offer 200 million to show sincerity." Sylvia found this reasonable and lifted her chin, saying, "Ethan, I'll give you one more chance. Give me 200 million right now, or you'll lose me forever." I was both amused and angered by the two siblings. It's also my fault for being too good to them before, which made them so arrogant. I said coldly, 200 million. Who gave you the nerve to ask me for such an outrageous sum? This isn't a place for you to beg. Get out of here. Sylvia was so angry she couldn't speak. Wade, humiliated and furious, said, "Ethan, what are you saying? Do you believe I'll—" Before he could finish, I kicked him in the stomach. He stumbled back a few steps, nearly falling. Narrowing my eyes, I said, "Listen up, I can crush you with ease right now. If you don't leave immediately, I'll make you regret it for the rest of your lives." Sylvia and Wade were intimidated by me and slunk away in disgrace. After venting my anger, I suddenly remembered that Sharon was beside me. I wondered if I had scared her. I cleared my throat a few times and said, "Sorry, you had to see that." Sharon smiled and said, "It's nothing. My mom told me about your situation. You have to say goodbye to the wrong person to meet the right one, right?" I was a bit surprised. It seems she is even more perceptive than I imagined. In my past life, I focused all my attention on Sylvia and missed many opportunities. This time, I won't make the same mistake. After dinner, I took Sharon home. On the way, I received a call from my mom. "How did your chat with Sharon go? Do you like her?" My mom was really anxious, unable to wait even a few dozen minutes. She's great, we hit it off really well. Hearing that there was hope, my mom cheered up, then spent more time together. She was happy, and so was I. Mom, tomorrow I'll take you for a full physical checkup. No need, I'm in great health. But with my insistence, my mom eventually went for the checkup. The doctor said she has a minor heart issue and just needs to be careful in daily life. I breathed a sigh of relief. In this life, I will take good care of my mother's health and won't let anything happen to her. Son, don't worry, I'm fine. I nodded and smiled. Of course, Mom, you'll live a long life. That afternoon, I suddenly received a call from a client asking when Sylvia and I would get married so he could prepare a wedding gift. That's when I found out that Sylvia had been telling others that the other night was just a little joke between us, and that she had accepted my proposal and was now my fiancée. She was using my status and position to delay the group's dead issues. Now the entire circle thinks she and I are about to get married. After explaining the situation clearly to the client, I called the assistant in. Notify the legal department to sue Sylvia for defamation, and also clarify my relationship with her, announcing that my fiancée is Sharon. With my mother's matchmaking, Sharon and I have officially started dating. I happen to want an opportunity to make the announcement public and put everyone at ease. The assistant nodded. Yes, sir. I'll take care of it right away. I toyed with my phone, thinking that since she had come to me willingly to be dealt with, I wouldn't let her off easy. After receiving the lawyer's letter, Sylvia was frantic with worry. For her current situation, this was undoubtedly adding insult to injury. But she couldn't see me. I had instructed the security at the company not to let her in, and the same went for my home. She could only find people everywhere to pass messages to me, but I completely ignored her. I saw Sylvia again at the club, being held by an old man. I recognized him. He was the biggest real estate developer in the city, old enough to be her father. He treated Sylvia roughly and kept forcing her to drink. I knew Sylvia's father would sell her off for money, and sure enough, he did. But she brought it all on herself. When Sylvia saw me, she clung to me like a lifeline. Ethan, save me. Everyone present looked at me, as if waiting to see whether I would help her. But I just swirled my glass indifferently and said coldly, none of my business. Thinking back to how vicious she was in my past life, I felt she deserved it. No matter how miserable she is now, I won't pity her. Sharon and I have a very stable relationship. We share similar interests and have plenty to talk about. A little over a week later, one evening, as Sharon and I were leaving a restaurant after dinner, we saw Sylvia and Finn arguing on the street. I could barely recognize Sylvia. Her face was sallow, her eyes were dark and hollow, and she was as thin as a skeleton. It was clear she had been through a lot recently. Your family is bankrupt and up to your ears in debt. You want me to suffer and pay off the debts with you? No way. You bastard, how could you do this? Sylvia pounded on Finn, but he shoved her away forcefully, and she fell to the ground. If it weren't for you, I would never have rejected Ethan back then. You ruined me. Seeing that Sylvia was no longer of any use, Finn dropped the act. Bullshit. It was your own arrogance. You thought you could marry a better man and look down on Ethan. Don't blame everything on me. Sylvia glared at him fiercely. Still making excuses. It was your sweet talk that deceived me. Otherwise, I would have married Ethan by now. How could I have ended up like this? Finn spat at her and said, I don't care even if you die. Stop pestering me. With that, he put his arm around another woman and walked away. Sharon and I passed by Sylvia. When she saw me, she immediately grabbed my pant leg. Ethan, I know I was wrong. Please don't abandon me, okay? You mean something to me. Will you marry me? As she spoke, she shot a glare at Sharon. I know you're not really with her. You're just trying to make me jealous. I stepped back 2 paces and said with disgust, Sharon is my fiancée. Don't compare yourself to her. You're not worthy. Sharon said, I'll wait for you in the car. I knew she wanted me to handle it myself, but there really wasn't much to deal with. Sylvia stood up, wringing her hands together, and said ingratiatingly, I didn't mean to do what happened last time. It was Finn who came up with the idea, telling me to slander you. He said you care a lot about your reputation, so you'd listen to me. Whether it was Finn's idea or her own, it was essentially the same. Seeing that I didn't speak, Sylvia thought I had taken her words to heart. Ethan, just have pity on me, save me. You have no idea how I feel like I'm living in hell every day now. My parents and my brother only want me to go accompany those old men, so they can make money to pay off the debts. But those old men are really perverted, they torment me, they make me. I looked down at Sylvia. All her arrogance was gone, and she looked 20 years older. Her regret was genuine, but if I softened, it would be fatal for me. Sylvia, your current situation is your own doing. I have no obligation to help you. Sylvia was in tears. No, Ethan, don't treat me like this. She tried to hug me, but I pushed her away harshly, and she fell back to the ground. It was only then that Sylvia realized I truly didn't want her anymore. Ethan, how did you become like this? Didn't you used to love me so much? Why? I coldly interrupted her, used to. Back then, I was blinded by infatuation. Now I've come to my senses. But I've fallen in love with you now. Only now do I realize you're the best person to me in the whole world. From now on, I'll cherish your love. Please give me another chance. I frowned. Your family may be bankrupt, but you can still afford a mirror, right? Go look at yourself. Even if you were my maid, I'd find you unlucky. I will never forget the look in her eyes when she pushed me off the rooftop in my past life, nor the vicious way she stepped on my corpse. That image has always been my nightmare. Sylvia was sobbing uncontrollably, trying to cling to my leg. I'll do anything if you're willing to help me, please. I pushed her away. Get lost. I walked toward the car without looking back. Even after I got in, she was still sitting there, covering her face with both hands, crying bitterly. Sharon looked out the window and asked me, are you really going to abandon her? Sharon didn't know how miserably I died in my past life, so it's only natural for her to ask that. I said while fastening my seatbelt, she's not worth my concern. I don't have feelings for her anymore. I freed one hand to hold Sharon's hand and said, the past is behind us. Now I just want to be with you. Sharon smiled gently and said, I understand how you feel. But Sylvia still wouldn't give up. She kept ambushing me every day near the company and my home. I directly called the police. After that, Sylvia disappeared from my world. For a long time afterward, I had no news of her, until I saw the news online that she had jumped off a building. It turned out that Sylvia's father, in order to pay off his debts, kept selling Sylvia to different men. She was either a mistress or a plaything, with no dignity at all. She wanted to resist but lacked the ability, and could only be controlled by her father. After all, she was young and beautiful, their family's only asset. Over time, Sylvia developed mental problems and became deranged. She believed that Finn was the one who had driven her to this state, so she went to seek revenge on him. Especially after learning that Finn married a wealthy heiress she had a falling out with, she went mad with rage and ran Finn over with her car, killing him. After killing Finn, she found a rooftop and jumped off. I checked the location, it was the very place where I died in my past life. Truly, the wheel of karma turns. As for Wade, he had a habit of street racing. He got into a car accident and ended up disabled, a fitting retribution. Sharon was very kind and loved doing good deeds. Whenever she had free time, she would go to the welfare home to take care of the children. I was moved by her kindness. Every month, I accompanied her to the welfare home and made regular donations, hoping to help more children. Speaking of which, my rebirth was also a mercy from heaven. I must do more good deeds to accumulate virtue. 6 months later, Sharon and I held our wedding and lived happily ever after.